Hey, Chamar, thanks so much for being with us today. And I'm sorry you couldn't get out here to Baltimore, but it's probably warmer where you are anyway.
Yeah.
So we're glad you could join us virtually at least, and appreciate you taking some time to record these videos for our participants in the room. So to start out, could you just introduce yourself and tell us where you teach and a little bit about your teaching situation?
Yeah. So my name is Chamar Williams. I'm teaching currently in South Phoenix at South Mountain High School in Arizona. But this is the first semester of my second year. And it's not without its challenges. However, it is far and away better than first year went.
What are some things that were beneficial for you in methods class? What have you been?
The number one thing that has really been a lifesaver for me has been the unit plan activity that we did in class, kind of like creating our own unit. We did that both in 480 and 482. And that's been huge for me because I have been trying to save everything that I do and save everything that I create. And so it's been really helpful to just organize myself within that unit plan. You know, we had to do the rationale and create like a calendar of like when we plan to do certain lessons, and then actually write those lesson plans, come up with a formative and summative assessment. And obviously the assignment that we turned in for your class was abbreviated because I think we only had to do 5 lesson plans, not in a row. And so for my purposes, I've been doing lesson plans for the entire unit, of course. But organizationally, as a new teacher, that has been just following that method and that rubric and the way you explained it. That was huge for me last year. But they were a good start because now I have that shell and I'm able to go in and manipulate. So for example, I guess a more concrete example, last year I taught juniors. I had 4 sections of junior classes and 1 senior section. And this year they've kind of flipped it on me. So now I have 1 junior section and 4 sophomore sections. And so I'm pulling a lot from what I did with my juniors last year. Right now we're beginning our unit on the Crucible. And so I'm just kind of going through the unit that I wrote last year for the Crucible. And I'm finding a lot of useful things. On the other hand, I'm also finding a lot of things that are head scratchers. I don't know that I would do that assignment ever again. But it's really helpful to go back and to actual see lesson plans and actually have reflections attached to those lesson plans and say, okay, well, this is why I didn't like that, and this is why that didn't work, and this is how we're going to move going forward. So what I found last year, one of my reflections is that the students had a hard time untangling that web. Though I would explain it and lecture and they would take notes on it, they couldn't recite it back to me. And so so I pulled that from my reflection last year, and this year I was kind of proactive instead of reactive with it. So I introduced them to all the characters. I had them fill out a character web on their own beforehand. And so they could use their notes and then also make inferences on who they think is going to accuse who next. And so it's kind of cool because now they have to pay close attention.
Refresh my memory. Was your final project for one of those courses, did you create a unit plan for the Crucible?
It was more the sequence. So I did not create one for the Crucible itself. I created one for All American Boys, which I was able to secure funding for and get a class set and then teach those.
Awesome.
Teach that novel, which has been great. That is, so we did All American Boys last year coming out of winter break. And my plan is to do the same again this year. And that text for me, when we did it in your class, it was, I don't know, I just felt as though like when we read it, it was like, man, I feel like the students, the population at South would really benefit from this. So the unit plan that I created for All American Boys, I have used, I did use last year. And again, that was again without its challenges, not without its challenges, I should say. There were some things in there that I think I turned in for your course that I was like, I'm not happy with this lesson plan one bit. I think that lesson plan was more of like, I hope Dr. G likes this. Instead of
it was more for me, not for your future students.
Right.
That's
Instead
fair.
of being practical, I did have to change some of that But the shell was there, and I really want to use texts that students at South can see themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know I just talked at great length about the Crucible, which none of my students can see themselves in those characters, perhaps not directly. But All American Boys is kind of our, we come back from break and then, they really don't see it coming. And so, last year they had some great fun with it. So, yeah.
Is there maybe one specific activity for All American Boys that has worked really well for you? You'd want to describe?
Yes. So there's one that I'm proud of, and it comes straight from your class. Actually, I just kind of morphed it a little bit, and so I created a worksheet, character analysis, and so it's there's 5 shields on the worksheet entirely, and so on the first page it's Rashad. There's a shield for Rashad and a shield for his brother Spoonie. And inside of it, I broke it up, I think, into 5 sections. And inside the 5 sections, they have to write a adjective that they would use to describe Rashad and Spoonie based on what they know from them so far. Off to the side, there's a few lines and 2 questions. The first question is, what do you believe to be Rashad's best trait, and why? There's the second question. The same thing for Spoonie. On the second page, I do the same for Quinn and his younger brother. His younger brother's name escapes me. Oh, Will. I do the same thing for Quinn and Will. And so again, what is their best trait and why? And then on the back, there's a much larger shield with the same the same number of sections in it, and they have to do it for themselves. And so they write down their best or their qualities. I think there's six qualities, and then they put, what do you think is your best quality and why? And before I pass that out, what we do is we do bell work every day, quick writes. And so in the quick write, I'll play the song DNA by Kendrick Lamar, his Damn album. And so I'll play the song, I'll put the lyrics on the screen. And I don't countless times in the song, Kendrick is saying, the different things that he has in his DNA. I got royalty, I got loyalty inside my DNA. So he'll just keep going off what he's got in his DNA. And so I'll play that song, and I'll tell them that, your DNA that makes you, that is what you are, entirely created from. And so I'll play that, and I have an activity where they have to kind of like write down what Kendrick says that he is, what are his best traits that he claims in his song. And then they kind of get to do that activity again on the worksheet. And so it goes from identifying what does Kendrick say that he has in his DNA? How does that make up what his best qualities are? And then they kind of go into identifying for Rashad, Spoonie, Quinn, and Will, what are their best qualities, and, how do they find their identity? And on the back, finally, like I mentioned before, it's that. So what's in their DNA, sort of.
That's great. What I love about that activity is you're crediting me with that, but I didn't do anything specifically like that. So I think what you're demonstrating for us, which I'll talk about with participants here, is adaptation. You were able to we used a Kendrick Lamar song, but it was a different one.
Right.
And I remember an activity that was sort of like what you're talking about, but you were able to adapt those to make them work for you, which I think is another really important skill, taking an activity that might work in one context and sort of revamping it to work in another.